and I'll bet you enough moderate Republicans and Democrats will vote for it to pass it. I challenge him. Bring it out. Let's see what happens. That's the way to end this debacle right now. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor. Sorry, note the absence of quorum. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Busy day on Capitol Hill with lawmakers. Quick recap of some things that have happened today. At the noon news conference of Democrats, Senator Reid said that he expects the Senate will be in session this weekend. No word from the House whether they expect to be in session over the weekend at this point. Also during the White House news briefing earlier, Jay Carney says that FEMA is recalling some furloughed employees because of Tropical Storm Karen. President Obama is being briefed and updated on that issue. And while we wait for a senator to speak, Oklahoma Republican Senator Tom Coburn challenged Senate Leader Mitch McConnell in a closed-door meeting yesterday. He said there is GOP leadership vacuum in the upper chamber. This, according to the Hill's Alexander Bolton. Another Republican senator told the Hill that Senator McConnell has paid too much deference to Senators Mike Lee and Ted Cruz. He's quoted as saying, "What gets me is he'll look at 46 Republican senators and say, what do Mike and Ted want to do? What are we, chopped liver?" unquote. This unnamed Republican also said he wouldn't want to be in Senator McConnell's shoes because of the situation they are in. Senator Coburn was on this morning's Washington Journal. While the Senate remains in this quorum call, we're going to show you that interview.
Tom Coburn, Republican of Oklahoma, member of the Finance Committee, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
On this day 3, what are your thoughts on what's going on?
Oh, I think it's failed leadership all the way around. I mean, think about it. We considered one appropriation bill in the Senate, and it was withdrawn because they didn't want to give amendments on it. So we ignored the process our founders set. The House passed, out of their committees, and the Senate appropriators, by the way, passed out of their committees the appropriation bills. But because we're playing politics for the next election, we didn't ever consider any of those bills. And then all of a sudden the fiscal year's over, and we have to do a continuing resolution, which is terrible for our federal employees because it doesn't allow us to make changes and do what we need to do a better job. And so I think it's
Correctly, a few minutes ago when I said the credit union was closed, I guess one office is closed someplace, but another office is open, and that they will take calls. So I guess the office in the Hart building is still open, but I guess another office someplace else is closed. So I spoke incorrectly. But I will continue to make this point. Isn't it a shame that our staffs who work hard have to go to a credit union to borrow money to get them through this period of time, to meet a mortgage payment or a car payment or whatever it is? We don't have to do that. We continue to get paid while we're here. But it's just, I mean, again, in response to the fact that, well, the sky hasn't fallen or the roof hasn't caved in, according to this congressman from Iowa, I mean, for someone like that who now has to borrow money, even from a credit union, I belong to the credit union, but has to borrow money from the credit union, it's just not right. This is just simply not right. And another reason why we got to call off this government shutdown, which I said we could do in the next few minutes, if Mr. Boehner would just put the continuing resolution he has over there on the floor and let his people vote on it. Mr. President, with that, again, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, we are now 3 days into a completely unnecessary, completely avoidable Republican shutdown, and there is more talk than ever about our inability of our leaders to find common ground on central economic and fiscal issues of our time. The government shutdown is throwing a major wrench into a fragile economic recovery. Nearly 1 million federal employees are sitting at home for no reason, and other public servants are working but not earning a paycheck. Cancer patients are being turned away from clinical trials at the NIH. Veterans' benefits are at risk. Basic nutrition services for pregnant women and new moms will be disrupted. Small businesses won't be able to get federal loan guarantees. And all this is happening on top of the idiotic sequester. Drastic, across-the-board spending cuts that have crippled Meals on Wheels, Head Start, and investments in medical research. We all know how we got here. For years now, we've heard a small minority in this country rail against government. When I hear the latest tirades from some of the extremists in the House, I am struck by how vague these complaints are. From their rhetoric, you'd think they believe that any time that we, the people, come together to improve our lives, that the nation is committing some terrible wrong. From their rhetoric, you'd think they believe that the government that functions best is a government that doesn't function at all. So far, they haven't ended government, but they have achieved the next best thing, shutting the government down. But behind all the slogans of the Tea Party and all the thinly veiled calls for anarchy in Washington, behind all that, there's a reality. The American people don't want the extremist Republicans' bizarre vision of a future without government. They don't support it. Why? Because the American people know that without government, we would no longer be a great nation with a bright future. The American people know that government matters. The anarchy gang is quick to malign government. But when was the last time anyone called for regulators to go easier on companies that put lead in children's toys? Or for food inspectors to stop checking whether the meat in our grocery stores is crawling with deadly bacteria? Or for the FDA to ignore whether morning sickness drugs will cause horrible deformities in little babies? We never hear that. Not from political leaders in Washington and not from the American people. In fact, whenever the anarchy gang makes headway in their efforts to damage our government, the opposite happens. After the sequester kicked in, Republicans immediately turned around and called on us to protect funding for our national defense and keep the air traffic controllers on the job. And now that the House Republicans have shut down the government, holding the country hostage because of some imaginary health care boogeyman, Republicans almost immediately turned around and called on us to start reopening parts of our government. Why do they do this? Because the boogeyman government is like the boogeyman under the bed. It's not real. It doesn't exist. What is real, what does exist, are all those specific, important things that we as Americans have chosen to do together through our government. In our democracy, government is not some make-believe thing that has an independent will of its own. In our democracy, government is just how we describe the things that we, the people, have already decided to do together. It's not complicated. Our government has three basic functions: provide for the national defense, put in place rules of the road like speed limits and bank regulations that are fair and transparent, and build the things together that none of us can build alone. Roads, power grids, schools, the things that give everyone a chance to succeed. We are a nation of innovators and entrepreneurs, growing small businesses and thriving big businesses. But our people succeed, our country succeeds, because we have all come together to put public institutions and infrastructure together. We all decided to pass laws and put cops on the beat so that no one steals your purse on Main Street or your pension on Wall Street. We all decided to invest in public education so that businesses have skilled workers and a kid with an idea can create the next breakthrough company. We all decided to invest in basic science so there is a great pipeline of ideas to create our future. These achievements aren't magic. They didn't simply occur on their own or through dumb luck. In each instance, we made a choice as a people to come together. The Food and Drug Administration makes sure that the white pills that we take are antibiotics and not baking soda. The National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration oversees crash tests to make sure that all new cars have effective brakes. The Consumer Product Safety Commission makes sure that babies' car seats don't collapse in a crash and that toasters don't explode. We don't know who they are, but there is no question that there are Americans alive today, Americans who are healthier, Americans who are stronger because of these and countless other government efforts. Alive, healthier, stronger because of what we did together. The anarchy gang at the House can dump on their make-believe version of government all they want. But when the real government fails to live up to the high expectations we have all set for it, politicians in both parties rush to outrage. Why? Because the American people know that government can work and believe government should work. Today, that's right, today marks the 5th anniversary of President Bush signing the bank bailout into law. That financial crisis cost us upwards of $14 trillion. That's trillion with a T. That's $120,000 for every American household. More than 2 years' worth of income for the average family. Billions of dollars in retirement savings disappeared. Millions of workers lost their jobs, and millions more families lost their homes. In April 2011, after a 2-year bipartisan inquiry, the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations released a 635-page report that made it plain regulators could have and should have used their existing tools to prevent the crisis. Republicans and Democrats, a bipartisan group, found strong agreement that, you better believe it, government matters. The attacks on government are abstract, but the consequences of this shutdown are real. Less accountability for cheaters and rule breakers, less opportunity for our children, cracks in the foundations that businesses need to succeed, and a tilted playing field that limits opportunities for all of our people. We know that government doesn't always work. We know that no institution is infallible. People make mistakes, ideas fail, and sometimes we do things wrong. But our response isn't to give up. Our response isn't to sit back and say, I told you so. We're not a nation of quitters. Our response, the American response, is to fix it, to make government work better. Our democracy is an experiment, and it's always evolving. We constantly redesign and reimagine and improve on what we do together. But time and time again throughout our history, we have reaffirmed the simple truth that government matters. And right now, right at this moment, if you look closely, you'll see that we are reaffirming it once again. It's not an accident that the desire to shut down government is confined to one extremist faction of one political party, of one chamber of Congress, of one branch of government. It is not an accident that this extremist faction must resort to absurd hostage tactics, threats to turn off the government, threats to default on our debt, threats to tank the economy, to force their views on everyone else. And it's not an accident that this faction is doing everything in its power to make government appear dysfunctional. In a democracy, these hostage tactics are the last resort for those who can't win their fights through elections, can't win their fights through Congress, can't win their fights for the presidency, and can't win their fights in court. But these threats are not working, and they will never work, because this is a democracy. And for more than 200 years, our democracy has defeated extremists and rejected the idea that government doesn't matter. So, Mr. President, to those who have forced us to the brink, to those who rail against a make-believe government, to those who seem to rejoice in anarchy, to those who have salivated the chance to shut down our government because their extremist views have left them disconnected from the experiences of the American people, it is time to hear a simple message. You can do your best to make government look like it doesn't work when you stop it from working. You can do your best to make government look paralyzed when you paralyze it. You can do your best to make government look incompetent through your incompetence and ineffective through your ineffectiveness. But sooner or later, the government will reopen, because this is a democracy, and this democracy has already rejected your views. We have already chosen to do these things together because we all know that we are stronger when we come together. And when this government reopens, when our markets are safe again, when our scientists can return to their research, when our small businesses can borrow, when our veterans can be respected for their service, when our flu shots resume and our Head Start programs get back to teaching our kids, we will have rejected your views once again. We are not a country of anarchists. We are not a country of pessimists and ideologues whose motto is, I got mine, the rest of you are on your own. We are not a country that tolerates dangerous drugs, unsafe meat, dirty air, or toxic mortgages. We are not that nation. We have never been that nation, and we will never be that nation. Today, a political minority in the House that condemns government and begged for this shutdown has had its day. But like all the reckless and extremist factions that have come before it, their day will pass, and our democracy will return to the important work that we have already chosen to do together. Thank you. I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
Senator from Tennessee.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum.
Without objection.
I didn't really expect to come down here and speak. I was just checking on a vote, judge vote, which I understand has been postponed. But I do want to say this. It appears to me that the CR discussion and the debt ceiling discussion are going to be combined maybe into one effort. And I just want to say that I think that is a great opportunity for all of us. I was down here yesterday talking about the same. Typically, when we have dealt with issues like this, what we've tried to do together is figure out a way to strengthen our country through making those kinds of reforms that lessen the amount of deficits we're going to have in the future. I mean, that's typically what debates like this have been about. And so I think the realization that people have right now that we could well try to deal with the CR and the debt ceiling at the same time could move us back into the kind of constructive conversations we've had for so long around mandatory spending reforms, figuring out a way to keep spending reductions where they are but build upon them, but do it in a way that's more sensible than what we've done in the past. So again, I was beginning to get worried, and I'll stop in just a minute. It looks like the senior senator.
Would my friend from Tennessee yield for a question?
I'd be tremendously honored to take a question from the...
Have you seen the polls of American public opinion about what we're doing here? Have you had a chance to see that?
You know, I don't pay as much attention to polls possibly as I should. My understanding in listening to the senior senator from Arizona is they're not particularly favorable.
To all of us. To all of us. I would.
No, I didn't mean to individuals. Yeah, no.
I mean to both sides of the aisle, and they don't understand, isn't it true, why we haven't been able to come to some conclusion. And as the senator from Tennessee just said, we now are going to have this merged into the debt limit. Right. Now, the senator from Tennessee has an extensive background in finances, and isn't it true that the markets would react the world markets would react in a very, very severe fashion if we allowed the debt limit to expire?
Well, I think everyone understands that that is very problematic for markets. Actually, we're beginning to see some volatility now that we haven't seen in the past. And I'd like to respond, if I could, a little more fully to say that I think we have an opportunity. Look, we've been in a place that I think people have known. We've known exactly where the discussions in the past were going to lead, and that is to this box canyon. I think the fact that we've ended up in a place now where these two things may merge, and I know the senior senator from Arizona has been involved in multiple conversations about this. I think we've got an opportunity now to begin talking again about those things that strengthen our nation and looking at some reforms, not to do so in a chicken way, in a way where you've got two cars heading at each other, but to use this like previous debt ceilings have been used in the past, where adults sit down, they look at the problems our nation is facing, and we do some things that, candidly, in a bipartisan way, people have been trying to do for a long time. And I just want to mention one more time, I know I did this yesterday, and I know the senior senator from Arizona and myself have spent a lot of time together on this issue, but the President, in his budget in April, put forth some mandatory reforms. Many of those are pretty good. I'd like to make them better, but they're a pretty good start, and we've got a few days, a week, 2 weeks here where we could actually sit down maybe and cobble some things together that would mean that while all this acrimony has existed for some time, we might get back on target and back on focusing on making our country stronger. I know today we were in this incredible hearing on Iran, and I certainly appreciated the senior senator's comment from Arizona's comments about our concerns there. But one of the biggest issues we have around the world right now is just people look at us, as you were alluding to a minute ago, unable to deal with our fiscal issues. And so I look at what's happened. I know it can be viewed in whichever way you want to view things. I look at it as being a glass being half full. We've got an opportunity over the next short period of time to do some good policy, put some good policy in place to pass ACR, to pass the debt ceiling, and again move our country ahead towards being stronger. I'm sorry to respond with a long answer.
Just one more question for my friend from Tennessee. We know that sooner or later the government will begin to function again. Sooner or later. Sooner or later we will address the debt ceiling because the United States is not going to renege on its debts. It's going to meet its obligations. So we know that those are facts. And we know that at some point there's going to have to be a resolution. It's not going to go on forever. Nothing does. And so if it argues for a solution, shouldn't we ask all parties to sit down and start discussions that you and I and others have had kind of on an ad hoc basis, sort of with people here and there, and then conversations here and there, to start laying the groundwork. And I also want to point out, I think it's important that the President of the United States, rather than saying, I won't negotiate with anybody under any circumstances, to say, I'm willing to sit down and negotiate. I'm willing to join with all parties and trying to find a way through this. We will sooner or later. The question is not whether we will solve these issues or not. The question really is, and I asked my friend from Tennessee, how much damage is done before we solve it? And right now, there are people beginning to hurt all over America. And maybe it's not so bad right now, but it's going to get worse every single day that goes by. And frankly, I think we owe the American people more than that. Now, if somebody wants to blame me, fine, I'll take the blame. They want to blame the senator from Tennessee, put the blame on him, on the president, on anybody. But shouldn't we remember what our duties are here?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm just looking down to see what the date is. But it seems to me that we have 2 weeks here where, and to get to the senator's comments, hopefully a week. In other words, the quicker we resolve these issues, the better it is for our nation, the better it is for the world, because at the end of the day, let's face it, what we care about most is the well-being of our citizens back home. And we know that uncertainty creates uncertainty in the economy. It affects people's jobs. So here's what I would agree. Look, we're at that moment in time where we've all realized the CR and the debt ceiling are probably going to be linked together. They are linked together in essence. And as the senior senator from Arizona just mentioned, there's no question we're going to resolve those. So what we ought to do is sit down right now, the President of the United States, the appropriate leadership here in the House and Senate, and whether it's them or their proxies, but to sit down and let's figure out if there are some reforms that we can put in place to make our country stronger and to, again, get back on the right topic, which is our financial strength. I think we could do that. Let me just, I know I'm speaking a long time. I don't know, I didn't have that much coffee today, but I've been, the fact is there are no new issues. Every single issue has been litigated. There's legislative language. They're scored. I mean, there's not a new issue for us to talk with relative to putting some good policy in place to move ahead. You've been so, the senator from Arizona has been so involved in these issues, and I just couldn't agree more. And I know the junior senator from Arizona is sitting in the back, and I know he's been incredibly responsible fiscally. I think we've got an opportunity. I think this body should take advantage of it. I think the President should come to the table, take advantage of it. The leadership of the House, let's do something good for our country. Let's do it in an appropriate amount of time. Let's put this behind us and move on. Move on as a nation.
I thank my friend. Do you yield the floor?
I do.
Madam President. Madam President, I want to thank my friend from Tennessee whose commitment to achieving solutions and resolution of this bitter environment with which we find ourselves is admirable, and I am grateful for his participation and his leadership. I also want to thank my young, handsome colleague from Arizona who also has had a many-year-long commitment to fiscal sanity and balance. So I thank my colleagues. I came to the floor, Madam President, to talk for a short period of time about Syria, which is although not dominating our conversation here, but lead stories in both the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal are deeply disturbing. First, I'd like to point out on the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, the title of the article is "The Syrian Regime Chokes Off Food to Town That Was Gassed." I repeat, Syrian regime chokes off food to the town that was gassed. Government forces are tightening the noose around one of the suburbs gassed by chemical weapons in August, raising concerns of a fresh humanitarian crisis as residents forage for olives, grapevine leaves, and other basic foods. Pro-regime fighters, that's Bashar Assad's killers, have encircled about 12,000 people, mostly civilians, but also including some rebel fighters in the town of Moad Hamaya. According to local and international aid workers, opposition activists and people interviewed on Monday in a government-controlled section of the town. This is a town that is strategically important to both sides because the flow of humanitarian and military aid flows through this particular areas for those who are fighting in Aleppo and in Damascus. And so the story goes on, quote, "We won't allow them to be nourished in order to kill us," said a 24-year-old pro-regime paramilitary in the government-controlled section. "Let them starve for a bit, surrender, and then be put on trial." Now, these are the same people, apparently government forces, that are, quote, cooperating with us on chemical weapons, that are allowing inspectors to come in and to gather up the chemical weapons. So they have 12,000 people encircled that they've already gassed, 1,400 of them, 400 children, same town. So now they're going to starve, like the fighter said, let them starve for a bit, surrender, and then be put on trial. It's remarkable. An opposition activist inside the rebel-held side of the town who was reached by Skype said the situation is so dire now in the rebel-controlled area that people are subsisting on whatever they can forage locally, including olives, grapevine leaves, fresh mint, and figs. So here we have the latest result of our wonderful and much heralded agreement on chemical weapons. They killed in this town 1,400 people, 400 of them children, with gas, and now they're going to kill 12,000 more with conventional weapons, bombs, guns, tanks, knives, and brutality and torture has characterized their behavior for a long period of time. It seems to me it's a little bizarre. It's a little bizarre that we are hailing this cooperation from Bashar Assad on chemical weapons, and meanwhile the slaughter goes on. 110,000 dead, 1 million children refugees, the surrounding countries being destabilized, and of course the refugee camps are terrible, terrible situations which we have not given the assistance that we should. I would urge all of my colleagues, if they had the opportunity, to visit one of these refugee camps and hear the stories of the murder, the gang rapes, the torture that is the official doctrine of Bashar Assad, not random acts of violence. The defectors from the Bashar Assad's military will tell you that that is their training and indoctrination and instructions. So the second today is the CIA ramping up, the Washington Post, CIA ramping up covert training program for moderate Syrian rebels. The CIA is expanding a clandestine effort to train opposition fighters in Syria amid concern that moderate U.S.-backed militias are rapidly losing ground in the country's civil war. But the CIA program is so minuscule that it is expected to produce only a few hundred trained fighters each month, even after it is enlarged, a level that officials said will do little to bolster rebel forces that are being eclipsed by radical Islamists in the fight against the government of Syria and President Bashar al-Assad. And here's the really interesting part. The CIA's mission, officials said, has been defined by the White House's desire to seek a political settlement, a scenario that relies on an eventual stalemate among the warring factions rather than a clear victor. As a result, officials said limits on the agency's authorities enable it to provide enough support to help ensure that politically moderate U.S.-supported militias don't lose, but not enough for them to win. We want to give enough support to help ensure that they have a stalemate, they won't lose, but don't have enough for them to win. Picture these young people who are fighting in Syria today, that the official United States policy is that they will provide weapons, but only enough so that they can't win. And these people are being slaughtered, they are being murdered, they are dying. There's 110,000 have died. I'm not sure how many of them were actual fighters. And the official United States policy, according to the Washington Post, is that they want them not to win. It's hard to motivate people to fight for a cause that we're not willing to help them win. The agency has trained fewer than 1,000 rebel fighters this year. Current and former U.S. officials said. By contrast, U.S. intelligence analysts estimate that more than 20,000 have been trained to fight for government militias, backed militias by Assad's ally Iran and the Hezbollah militant network it sponsors. So we've trained 1,000, and we are going to do about 100 a week, I guess, something like that. And there's more than 20,000 have been trained by the Iranians, who are all in, and we expect them to be able to continue fighting. The CIA is ramping up its effort. It was clear that the opposition was losing, and not only losing tactically, but on a more strategic level. Congressman Mike Rogers, who I respect a lot, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said, quote, "There's a high degree of frustration with the Syrian strategy. The situation in Syria is changing faster than the administration can keep up." He said that the U.S. support for moderate opposition groups is, quote, "less than robust and has been hobbled by inconsistent resource allocation with stated goals." The CIA veterans expressed skepticism that the training and weapons deliveries will have any meaningful effect. That's CIA veterans. In Jordan, operatives involved in training and arming rebels lament, quote, "We're being asked to do something with nothing." Well, and then, of course, I'd like to just mention two other. Al-Qaeda expands in Syria via Islamic State. A rebranded version of Iraq's Al-Qaeda affiliate is surging onto the front lines of the war in neighboring Syria, expanding into territory seized by other rebel groups and carving out the kind of sanctuaries that the U.S. military spent more than a decade fighting to prevent in Iraq and Afghanistan. We left Iraq. Iraq is now deteriorating. Thousands of people are being killed literally every day, every month. And now we see Al-Qaeda coming from Iraq in larger and larger numbers. And then finally, I'd like to mention the Wall Street Journal article of some time ago. Iranians dial up presence in Syria. Shiite militiamen from across the Arab world train at a base near Tehran to do battle in Syria. At a base near Tehran, Iranian forces are training Shiite militiamen from across the Arab world to do battle in Syria, showing the widening role of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard Corps in Syria's bloody war. The busloads of Shiite militiamen from Iraq, Syria, and other states have been arriving at the Iranian base in recent weeks under cover of darkness for instruction in urban warfare and the teachings of Iran's clerics, according to Iranian military figures and residents in the area. The fighters' mission, fortify the Syrian regime of Bashar Assad against Sunni rebels, the U.S., and Israel. So, here's what we should take away from all the recent reporting. Despite the recent agreement on chemical weapons, that agreement does nothing to address the underlying conflict in Syria, which not only continues, but is getting worse and worse. So, my friends, as the administration trumpets this deal of chemical weapons, the fact is that the slaughter goes on, and it's clear to these people who I have spoken with personally, tragically, their morale is badly damaged. They believe they've been abandoned, and the ongoing tragedy and massacre continues in Syria, and the United States will pay a very, very heavy price in the future unless we do something rather dramatic. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Maryland.
I would ask consent that after the quorum call that I be recognized.
Without objection.
I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
All right, this news update. According to the Associated Press, the U.S. Capitol Police are saying that the U.S. Capitol is in lockdown. There are reports of gunshots and an injured Capitol Police officer. Again, reports of gunshots and an injured Capitol Police officer. The U.S. Capitol is in lockdown.
Madam President,
Senator from Maryland.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I would ask consent that we stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.
Without objection. Senate stands in recess subject to the call of the chair.
Okay, once again, we're hearing, according to the Associated Press, police say that the U.S. Capitol has been put on a security lockdown amid reports of possible shots fired outside the building. People standing outside the Supreme Court across the street from Congress were hurried into the court building by authorities. U.S. Capitol Police say that they've received reports of gunshots and one police officer has been injured. While the Senate takes a break, we're going to show you a portion of this morning's Washington Journal.